Welcome to Stage Dive, a podcast where we go deep on the art of live performance to help artists perform better on stage. I am your host, Jack Dawkins. I am a rapper, poet, and storyteller out of Boulder, Colorado. My guest for today is Dave Ratner. He is the co-founder and an entertainment attorney with Creative Law Network. But do not be fooled, he did not come straight out of law school. He spent years on the road doing management, doing tour routing, driving the bus, doing all the things that you would hope someone who goes into entertainment law really understands at the ground level. I am also his client, so I had a really fun time asking him questions about how new artists should approach working with a lawyer, the important things to think about, what documents you want to have in place, how to think about where and when to spend your money. It's a super rich and valuable conversation for anyone who is curious about entertainment law, broadly speaking, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So, for fun, where I would like to start this conversation is what is one of your gnarliest road stories from when you were managing artists and out on tour?
That's where we're starting. Okay.
Yeah.
I will actually say something, which is that I was really fortunate in that we didn't get screwed over a lot. I can think of one time where we literally didn't get paid, but most of our times it was, it came out. So with all of the horrible things we hear about the music industry, I was actually pretty fortunate. Certainly there are, I think, plenty of more entertaining stories. Like there was one time, I drove the bus as well as being the tour manager.
Oh my God.
And so I had driven all night and we stopped because everyone started to wake up and people want to use the bathroom or whatever. So we stopped at this kind of very, not even truck stop, side of the road shack that maybe had a bathroom and a Coke machine. And so people kind of pile off and people pile on and we start driving. I start driving again and we're 20, 30 minutes down the road and someone's like, where's so-and-so? Like,
oh, no.
So not only did he had gotten up in his pajamas, gone to the bathroom without his phone, so we left him in the middle of Alabama, Mississippi, somewhere terrible that he would never want to be, and he comes back out and the bus is gone, and he was so pissed. So we turned around, but 45 minutes later we get back there, and he was so pissed. No one got hurt. Right? I don't think anyone got hurt on tour for the most part. But yeah, so things like that. I mean, look, my job was so much about herding cats because this is also before we all had smartphones, right? So it's not like you could just text someone and be like, hey, where are you? Right? It was kind of like, okay, we'd load in and sound check and everyone would scatter. And then I'd hope to get them back in time.
I can feel the panic in my chest as you describe that of just keeping track of all the bits and pieces.
I am a very organized person, which is what I kind of brought to the job, I think, in keeping most people on track. Most of the time, we usually would get to the gig or the venue somewhere within an hour of load in, maybe. But yeah, it was a different time. I mean, before the tour, I would print out maps to everywhere we were going to. There was no, and so, but yeah, honestly, I learned so much about the industry, about people, about what I needed to know to kind of do what I was doing then, to become a manager, to do what I'm doing now. It was all super interesting, educational, and a good thing to do in my 20s, basically.
Yes, it's an excellent thing to do in your 20s.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, it's hard to give an answer that requires some level of omniscience, but I'm curious, the music industry does not have a great reputation as a starting point. There's a lot of negative energy flowing around how it works and how people operate and et cetera, et cetera. There's also a lot of narrative around how artists are disorganized and difficult to herd and et cetera, et cetera. How much of that do you think is actually true versus, negativity tends to amplify more loudly than quiet kindness?
On the industry side, I think that I don't know that it is necessarily worse than a lot of other industries. I think that what's difficult about it is what we end up hearing in mainstream media or in kind of in stories that are told versus what the average experience is like. So,
Sure.
right, because there are millions of artists out there. We're not hearing about all of them, and we're only hearing about a select few. I do always like to use the comparison. There's that movie Almost Famous, right?
Yes.
And people are always like, people ask me, you were on the road. What was it like? It was not like that,
Yeah.
right? There were not just wild
It was
parties,
not
and
that.
yeah, I mean, there were wild parties, but no one else was paying for them, and like I still had to get up in the morning and drive the bus or whatever.
Yes.
But I think that so we do. You kind of it's easy to hear about the bad stories. You never hear about all the good stories. You don't hear about all the contracts, the
Mm,
deals that are kept.
right.
So I think what's interesting is your question, the kind of two questions you asked are linked in the sense that one of the problems is that people get taken advantage of.
Yes.
And the artists who do not have necessarily a good business sense or aren't paying attention to their business and haven't surrounded themselves with necessarily trustworthy or upstanding people are more likely to get screwed. And those are the stories we're more likely to hear.
Sure.
I think there is a certain amount of right brain, left brain. Okay. There is a certain amount of the average artist versus the average, I don't know, banker, whatever,
Right.
that are
Right.
different. But these are generalizations. And I know plenty of artists who are great business minds. And I don't know a lot of bankers, but I'm sure there are bankers who are not well organized. Right.
100%.
And so I do think that there is some truth to both of these things, the bad reputation of the industry, the artists who are not very business minded. I think there's truth to both of those things. But I don't think it is the rule necessarily across. Again, you can't generalize to everyone. And I think for a lot of artists, I mean, I'll take one step further here for you in just saying that it is about having a trusted and skilled team that can handle those things if you don't want to. Because there are artists that love to have their hands in the day to day, and there's artists that can't wait to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And there's room for both, right? But if you can't wait to get rid of it, make sure you're handing it to someone who knows what they're doing, who's trusted, who's hopefully done it before, all
Right.
those sorts of things. Just
Yes.
like if you're choosing a doctor or a banker or whatever, these people are providing a service to you. They want to make sure they're good at that service.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think something I do feel like that's missing from the conversation is like, yes, you should absolutely get someone who is good at these things. But I think what's so important for the artist is that he, she, or they can continue to participate in the business in a way that actually works for them. Because I think it's so easy to be like, you're good with money. I'm not. Here's the money. You figure it out. And even not for salacious reasons, not out of malice, like the person who is good with money may just have a different approach or way of doing things. And if the artist entirely divorces themselves from it, then 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road, they're like, wait, hold on, like why did we do this? And this is like, well, because you said you didn't want to touch it. And so I think
Right.
like the the key is not to make all artists good at spreadsheets. I don't think that's realistic. But finding someone who can actually communicate with the artist in a way where they get to continue to be involved and be a part of the dialogue in a way where it's, dare I say, fun or at least engaging and they can wrap their heads around it. I think that's a piece that more people would benefit from versus just getting someone who is quote unquote good at whatever the missing skill set is.
I agree with you. I totally agree. It is personal preference, right?
Yeah.
It's personal taste. But I totally agree that it is helpful for the talent, for the artist to have that connection to their business to the extent that they want to, right? To the
Yes.
extent that they're comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would love to time travel backward a little bit. Like,
Okay.
how did Dave grow up? How did you wind and find yourself in the world of music in your 20s?
Uh, I would say that the way Dave grew up has nothing to do with how Dave ended up in the world of music,
Ideal.
except that Dave was a
Likewise.
big. I mean, Dave was a big music fan for sure.
Okay.
I definitely listened to a lot of music, and that whether that in my childhood it was the Casey Kasem Top 40 Countdown. If
Nice.
you're from that generation or generations that listen to that, but
Hmm.
quickly I got my first Grateful Dead bootleg when I was 10, and was at my first Dead show when I was 14. So like that is a different side of things. Talking about touring, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that so I always had a passion for music
Okay.
and get a lot of joy out of music. And so what happened was when I was in my 20s, I was working for a great company doing project management. Basically, we built and maintained websites for financial services companies. Who cares? Point is, I had this
Great.
great job that I did not care about at all. Like I
Yep.
sat down at my desk at 9 a.m., I checked out at 5 p.m., and I was so detached. And I was like, I can't do this for the rest of my life.
Mm.
Or I don't want to, rather. And I'm at a point in my life where, well, if I want to make a change, now would be a
It's a
good
good
time.
time.
Also, I was an idealistic 20-something-year-old, and I said, I want to do something I'm passionate about.
Mm.
Well, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about music. And so I literally called up my favorite band at the time. I was living in Boulder, your hometown now. And I called up my favorite band. I said, I want to work for you. They said, well, you could like make sure our CDs are in stores in the towns we're going to play in. Remember CDs, right? We used to have
Yeah.
those things.
Mhm.
And I said, that all sounds great, but if I'm going to do this, I want to do it full time. And so they said, okay, well, you can come on the road with us and sell CDs at the shows. And
Yep.
so I did. I literally got on the bus and was selling T-shirts and CDs and hauling gear and um, doing whatever was needed to be done. And eventually, kind of started driving the bus, started getting involved in advancing shows, became a tour manager, and started doing a lot more management stuff as well. Because this band that I was tour managing was self-managed, didn't have an outside manager. So there was that need to be doing the marketing and advertising, be doing the fan contact, handling those business things, because the band is always on the road. I was on the road as well, which was a challenge. And so eventually got off the road, set up an office, start a management agency so that I could actually really focus on the management stuff. And so that's how I got to there.
That's so interesting. And I'm guessing, but sometimes like those jobs sort of you're building the rocket ship as it's taking off, right? Kind of like the needs present themselves, and if you happen to have a spare percentage point of capacity, you jump into it, you figure it out, and then you
Yeah.
keep going.
Yep. Yeah. And that was a lot. Yeah. It was like I saw this needed to be done. Like so back then, the way that we promoted these shows was we had street teams in the towns we were playing in. The street teams would go and hang posters and hand out flyers. Well, someone had to make those posters and flyers, someone had to send them to the street team. And so we would I would park the bus in the parking lot of a Kinko's. The band would be asleep on the bus. I'd be in the Kinko's all night, printing, packaging, mailing, for the next tour and just trying to keep it all because it needed to be done. Right? We
Yeah.
want people at these shows and like, yes, the venues will promote, but like we knew that if we did our own promotions, that would help. And so yeah, I mean, to your point, it's like I saw a need and I tried to fill it. And honestly, that's how I ended up becoming a lawyer is
Mhm.
that I was managing these bands and what I really enjoyed about all of that was helping artists with the business side so they could focus on the art side. So
Yeah.
kind of going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, the artists, yes, are going to be involved in the business, but really their job is making art,
Yes.
right? And my job was to help with the business, not to the exclusion of them involved in the business, but I was not making the art. I was not in the
Right.
studio. I
Right.
was not on stage. And what I realized was all these bands that I was managing needed a lawyer, right? Because they would get a contract and we had to find a lawyer to read it.
Right.
And so again, it was filling the need. It was like, we need a lawyer. We don't have a lot of qualified lawyers in our community. So I decided to go to law school.
There you go. Like that inclination and energy toward like there is blank space, let me go fill it. It's very entrepreneurial. Do you have a sense of like where that came from?
You know, I haven't thought about that. Um, I mean, my dad, was a small business owner. He ran a family business for his entire career, and
Okay.
I saw a lot of that. But I honestly, I think it's also just my personality of of wanting to get things right. You
Mm.
could also call me a control freak. I'll take either.
Who's to
Right, a
say?
bit of a perfectionist, which is also a problem. and just wanting things to go a certain way. And so seeing that need, and look, when I graduated from law school, I did work for a firm. I worked for a small law firm that wanted to do entertainment law, and so, again, saw that need, and they kind of had legal expertise, but not the industry expertise. I had the industry expertise, but not yet the legal experience. So I worked for a firm for a while before starting my own firm. And again, really saw that, like, in participating in that firm I was working for, saw a lot of, helped put in place a lot of methods and procedures and processes and systems. And I like that systems work. And so being able to do it, I think everything from managing tours to managing a law firm is all stuff I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm curious, like, so you're in your 20s, you're up all night at Kinko's, you're selling t-shirts, and like, I worked in restaurants. I remember those days where it's like, I'm holding this together with duct tape, but ooh, it's fun. And like, there's an allure to it. And like, yeah, it's lovely. But I'm curious, when you went back to both law school and a more structured environment, what did you appreciate about being in an environment that was more quote unquote traditional or typical? And where did you find yourself sort of chafing against or missing some of that craziness from your 20s?
I think it is helpful for me to have a path, right? To
Okay.
have it like this, then this, then that. And so law school is very good at that. Like, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do that. And so that was definitely, that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of more, the kind of crazy side, still going to shows, right? I'm still
Mm,
enjoying being in the music scene, even if I'm not backstage, like, making sure that everybody's getting on stage on time. I can
right.
be backstage, hang out with, and just hang out with everybody without having to actually work on the show. Now, you probably know, and I know a lot of the guests, the great guests you've had here, know that once you work in it, it's hard to separate yourself from it, right? It's like,
Yep.
I can't go to a show and just be a fan. That's
Right.
long gone,
That's a long
right?
ago.
But it's
Oh
okay
man.
because I can enjoy it in the same way I enjoy, or there's the things that I enjoyed about working when I was a tour manager that I can still enjoy at working because the clients I represent as an attorney are now on stage.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And there's tremendous parallel with restaurants. I remember before I started my first job, 22, right out of college, like kind of getting ready to jump in, and the manager sat me down, and I thought he was being overly serious. He was like, eating out will never be the same ever. Like you will not be able to enjoy it the same way you do now. Are you sure? And I was 22, so I didn't know anything. I was like, yeah, 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 it's fine. Sure as shit. Like I'm 36 and I'm pretty sure until I die, like when someone is saying something is 86, when someone is saying someone called out, when I see someone panicking and looking for a spoon that isn't dry yet, like I see all of that shit. You cannot turn off the radar once it's embedded in your brain. It's impossible. It's
Yep,
impossible.
yep. And there's benefits and drawbacks to that, right? But I think, but props to your manager for saying, nobody said that to me.
Yeah.
No one said you're never going to enjoy music the same way again. Um, but I will. One thing I have said to people though, because I had interns and I've certainly worked with a lot of people interested in getting started in the music industry and the entertainment industries in general. And I think that the thing that I learned was that everyone has their motivations for any career they choose, any job
Sure.
they decide to pursue, and most of the people I talk to, like, they're going to start volunteering, they're going to start working for this artist or this agency or whatever. I always tell people, if it is your passion and if you will get satisfaction out of that, fantastic. Do it, support the arts, get in there and do good things. If you want to be rich and famous, this is not the way. Because the percentage, right, the millions of bands and the percentage that are rich and famous, right? It's like I hope that happens for you, but don't let that be your motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very fair. Um, it's very fair. Although my hope, and again, I'd be curious to hear what you're sort of seeing on the ground, is like between among the way the internet is sort of changing the dynamic, the way Web3 and NFTs are starting to get involved. Like everyone is sort of obsessed over the idea of 1,000 true fans. 1,000 fans, you spend $100 a year, that's 6 figures. And like, is that, rock star life? No, but earning 6 figures, doing something you love, ooh, like, yes, please. Like, that sounds great. I think there are, by definition, still some entrenched systems. And what I find myself observing is that there's a notion of scarcity. Only so many people get to make it. And so I got to do it right. I got to follow what these people are doing. I got to sort of fall in line, blah, 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 blah. And I think people so quickly abandon what is unique about them, what helps them connect to people in service of trying to be yet another salmon swimming up the same stream. And I say that with love because I know that the artists are absolutely doing everything in their power to make it work. And it's like, ooh, but like if you just got a small handful of people who are super obsessed with what you did and would always come to see you live and buy your merch and buy your vinyl and tell other friends about you, man, I think that's going to do better than a playlist placement. I think, right? Like law of averages.
Yeah. Well, so I should also clarify, when I'm saying don't expect to get rich and famous, do it, I was talking about the people who are working for the artists, not the artists themselves.
Sure.
The artists need to have that drive, for sure.
Yes.
But I also think what you're saying, I mean, it's your definition of success, right? It's like, because I certainly in the arts, I mean, in general, if you are making a living, feeding yourself, paying your rent or mortgage, whatever it is, and comfortable, success.
Yes.
Right. And then there is the small percentage that are uber wealthy and whatever. I think the influencer world, like you said, with Web3 and I mean, which is social media in general, that whole world has shown us that people can be very financially successful in a very niche way. And I think in the music world, one of the things that's interesting that technology has changed, and this is not new technology, but the technology that allows us to call up any song we want on our phone or whatever device you're using allows us to follow and listen to a certain niche to the exclusion of all else. Right. So when I was growing up, you had radio and you had to listen to whatever was on the radio or whatever, cassette you might have. But there was no, oh, I want to listen to this, and there it is. And so I think the benefit to artists of that is that you can cater to your niche and you can be really successful in your niche, and you don't need airtime on mainstream radio to have those 1,000 fans, however many fans that are dedicated,
Yes.
because we've got that. Now, there's a lot of horrible things about the way the technology has changed the music industry. I'll agree on that. But one of the kind of rosier side, or one thing we can call out that I think can fit to the model you're explaining, is that you can have that niche, and that niche can support you, and you don't have to be playing stadiums in order to be successful.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think particularly once you start to figure out who is in that niche, then you can actually start to design products and experiences. And there's an artist named Fletcher, and she just launched, I think it's for like 100 fans to go with her down to Costa Rica and stay at a resort with her. And she's going to do like a set every night, one acoustic, one full band, and one with a DJ. They're going to do like a couple of meals with her. There's a Q&A. It's like ultra access to her. And like, she is really excited about that. I would never do that. Like, personally, that's not my speed.
Right. Now
But for her
you're fun.
fans and the way they're connected, that works really well. And like, how beautiful that she gets to invent, as far as I know, a way of connecting with her fans that's going to put money in her pocket, that's going to be really special for them. And I think the more we as artists can continue to find creative ways to serve the people that are excited about what we do, I think this gets a lot more fun versus it being like the only way to win is getting a billion streams. Like,
Well, but like you say, it depends on what's fun for you, right?
that's
So
true. That's very
because
true.
I mean, one thing that I hear a lot of is, and this is more pre-pandemic. Well, actually, that's not true. Is it's so much about the fan connection, right? That like be at the merch table after your set and sign things and shake hands and do all those sorts of things. Some people like that more than others, and that may be a better fit for some fans or artists than others. But I think the access aspect of it is something that artists are definitely are latching onto or figuring out, that can be a financial benefit from granting that access. Because I see a lot of international shows like the ones you're talking about, the cruises, right? These themed
Yep.
cruises with everybody. There's a series of shows that go on down in Mexico, more around the jam band scene, that are huge. Thousands of fans paying
Mm,
thousands of dollars to spend 3 nights seeing their favorite band on the beach.
sometimes in a row. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there, I think, but you're right. It's like, find the thing that works for you and your fans, and the things that you're going to enjoy, that's satisfying, or that you're not going to hate, at
Yes.
least.
Yes. Yes. Start
Right.
there. Start it. I don't hate this. Work your way toward, I really love this.
Right.
Always,
I
yeah.
mean, I've done ski trips with bands where their fans
Super
all go
cool.
skiing with the band, and like, band wants to go skiing. Great. Fans will
Yeah.
pay for it.
That's super cool. That's awesome. Um, So let me just retrace the steps. So you grew up with a deep passion for music, first dead tape at 10, first show at 14, which is amazing. I have a completely separate rabbit hole question, which I'm going to pin for later in the conversation, but I'm clocking that the Grateful Dead and watching the Grateful Dead tour, which meant like the caravan that followed, which I just think is like a fascinating concept. So we'll put a pin in that.
Oh, totally. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Graduate from college, start working at a firm, good pay, good benefits, 9 to 5, easy peasy, and you're like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Reach out to a band, go basically invent a job by finding all the things that aren't getting done or aren't being done as well as they could be. Create a role, take that, create an agency so you can do that for more and more groups. Eventually realize there's a need for creative law, let's call it, and go to law school, spend some time in a firm, and now you have your own shop.
Yep.
I think something that I hear all the time in both artistry and entrepreneurship is like there's never a right time. There is no moment when you are officially ready. So when you were at the firm, you've now like sort of gone through these steps. What were your sort of benchmarks or metrics to say like, ah, cool, I'm ready to go do this?
Oh, that's making an assumption that that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Just trying to be generous.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. This is, I mean, I think that it is a great question because it applies in so many different scenarios. Where, it's like, when do you make the jump? When do you make that decision? When do you make that change?
Yes.
And I think it's a lot about personality. I discuss this with my wife a lot, about how she makes decisions versus how I make decisions, versus
Mm,
how our family members make decisions. Right. I
sure.
think that is personal. I'm sure there's a lot of psychology around that, and I've not studied it, and it's probably not in my future to study it, but I'm sure we could look that up. But so for me, it was very much more um, about knowing that this was the path I was going to follow. Because when I was running the management agency, one of the reasons I went to law school, or rationalized going to law school, was I love running my own business. As a lawyer, I can run my own business. So I knew it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when.
Got it.
And for me, one of the things that is kind of a guiding light or guiding principle, I should say, for the firm, is trying to solve problems, trying to fix, I won't say fix things in the legal industry, but basically, I've been a client, right? I've hired lawyers. I know lots of other people who've hired lawyers, and I've heard a lot of feedback about what people do and don't like about their lawyers. And so, in creating Creative Law Network, my firm, it was a lot of, as we're creating those systems, as we are implementing policies and procedures, that's all informed by what I've learned, what I've heard from others. So, common complaint that people have about the attorneys they work with is that the attorneys do not respond promptly. You send your attorney email, they don't get back to you for 2 weeks. So at Creative Law Network, we respond within a business day, no matter what, because we know that's going to make people happier. We want our clients to be happy, right?
Mm,
And so I think that it's not, I mean, kind of trying to link this back to your question about how to know when. It wasn't so much knowing when, it was knowing what. It's like, what
mm.
are the things we want to do? What are the problems we want to fix? What are the services we want to provide? All with the goal of just having happy clients, right? Or just having people satisfied with the work we're doing.
Yes. Yes. And running your own business.
I do enjoy that part too. It is
Yes.
also not for everyone though, right? I
It
mean,
assuredly is not.
right? You know, right?
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that is really sometimes hard to communicate is that a band is a business. An artist is a business, right? I mean, and whether you are a musical artist or a visual artist, or I mean, for better or worse, the art you're creating is a product, and you're trying to sell it to customers. And we may not think about marketing for music, marketing your track or your album or your painting or your sculpture, but if we want to make money, we are in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that, I think, and that is something that is not something we always want to think about, but ultimately it's something that I'm helping clients run their business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that point is always so interesting to me. And it also feels like a 17-way intersection of so many different truths, right? Like in an ideal world, yes, you would be creating completely from a place of truth and inspiration and from your inner guidance, and that makes beautiful art. Um, and it's like, okay, but if you want to get paid for something, it's now a different conversation. Then there's the opposite end where like if you create something purely for the purpose of monetary exploitation, you're creating a pop song that fits a formula, that has a set of words, that like it only exists to serve this thing and it makes money. Is that art? Or is it a product? Is it just sort of commercialized ideas? Like, and again, I don't think there's right or wrong answers to any of it. It's fascinating though how easy it is to kind of get hamstrung, deeply guilty of this, and trying to find the right balance of how much am I treating this like a business and how much am I focused on how to get in front of people, how to market it, how to tell the story, etc., versus how much am I actually just letting myself be an artist, which to an extent is why I started doing this in the first place.
I will tell you, and this is, you wouldn't think that I can identify the same struggle with being a lawyer, but here I go. And this may jump ahead on other things you want to talk about, but I got into this business. I got into law because the artist I was managing, couldn't afford a lawyer, right? Because lawyers are so stupid expensive. And so I was like, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to help everybody. And then you realize you actually have to charge for your services to pay the rent, the employees, the insurance, whatever. And so there is that tension of like, I want to make sure that all artists who need a lawyer have a lawyer, but I can't be that lawyer because I need to feed myself as well, right?
100%.
And so it is. I can definitely relate to that. In that, I also, I do plenty of pro bono work, right? I definitely want to make sure that I'm continuing to support in that way, but also have to charge for that work, and that can be a tension. And there are plenty of ways that I want to make sure we talk about how artists can access legal services, regardless of income. But it is definitely it is tough because I know how much artists make, and I know what I need to charge, and I try and fit that in so that I'm only charging what people can afford.
Right, right. Yeah, and again, it's an imperfect science. Whatever your rates were, there would be someone for whom it's too expensive.
Sure, yeah, and yes, that is true.
Yeah,
that is true.
if you go in with the intention of, again, like collecting, like I'm collecting names, I'm collecting business cards, I'm collecting future people who could help me, it's going to be shit. Similarly, like if you make music with the intention of like, I'm going to collect fans, I'm going to do that, like I think the art becomes derivative. I'm not going to say people haven't been successful in doing those things, but I'm not in it to get a billion followers. I'm not in it to kind of win those games. So for me, like the art I'm trying to make is a sincere attempt to create emotional resonance in other people based on the experiences I've had and how I choose to portray them in my music. And similarly, when I'm networking, like I'm portraying the emotion of where I want to go and what I want to do, what I aspire to be. And I'm allowing people to connect to that emotion. And then what they do after they connect to the emotion is kind of out of my hands. I'm not going to try and control it. Similarly, when I put a piece of music out, like I may have made it with the intention of healing heartbreak or inspiring people or whatever. But at the end of the day, depending on where someone intersects with that piece of music and what's happening, like I don't get to control that. And so it's as much about having the intention with how you show up and then letting go of the outcome, because you're acknowledging, like, in any transaction with two people, like, you don't totally control the outcome. I think, yeah, I mean, I know that one of the things I want to talk about is if you were putting yourself in the artist's shoes and they're thinking about getting legal help, how to do that. But before we get there, something, I know you and I have had this conversation. I think it's so interesting. As a I was married to a lawyer at one point. I work with you directly. Like, I'm not new to lawyers, and it amazes me how much the nature of contracts can feel adversarial.
Yeah.
And I know that again, it doesn't come from a place of malice. It comes from a place of acknowledging that there are inherent risks to the way that we conduct ourselves and do business in the world. Contracts are meant to protect us from that. And in order to do that, you have to ask the question, what could go wrong? And how do I protect myself against what could go wrong? But I'm curious, like, as you navigate so many of the different conversations you do, how do you think about that adversarial nature of kind of like, I have to write this document that is going to exclude another party from certain access or rights or whatever it is?
Well, I think the most important thing is the premise of your question, which is that contracts favor one party or another, which is not inherently true. People don't realize that a contract can't be drafted agnostically. It can't be drafted neutrally, basically. And you can try, but it's just there are inherently things that are either going to benefit one side. We make it as mutual as possible. That doesn't mean it is equally fair. And so it is just kind of the nature of the process where when you're drafting out language, it's going to favor one side or the other. It doesn't necessarily have to be as far as adversarial. In other words, it's not that we have to fight over these terms. And we can make it generally fair, especially when we're guiding it by industry standards. But there is there's something we say in contract law that he who drafts first wins, right? If I draft the contract, I get to make it in my client's favor. If you get to draft the contract, you get to draft in your client's favor, and then we try and negotiate something in the middle. I can draft a contract that is far more biased in my client's favor or far more neutral than it, but it's just kind of inherent, and it's a hard thing to explain. I think that if we want to take the time to talk about various, like, I could give you a legal clause and show you how it has to be drafted this way or that way. But you can, even if we're talking about, like, what's the percentage royalty in a record deal, okay, or percentage of ticket sales you're going to get, or whatever it is, right? It's like, well, that's a number, and one party's going to want the number higher, the other party's going to want the number lower. You can't make it neutral, right? Yeah. So I think, however, there's also, it's really important to say that what our society shows us is that lawyers fight with each other. And in fact, what society shows us is that lawyers just go to court. That's all lawyers do. Right? That's all you ever see on television and movies, right?
Right.
And I object, and that's not what this is about. Yeah. In fact, rather, that's not what a lot of lawyers do, myself included. We are transactional lawyers, as you say, contract lawyers. It is not about going to court. It is about basically papering deals, right? It's about negotiating a deal, putting it into a contract, and making sure that is a good deal. It is about, for my work, it's a lot of intellectual property, copyrights and trademarks, registering that intellectual property, protecting that intellectual property. I mean, I see my job as mostly as protecting my clients, but it's not, people always call me up, oh, I've got a great case. Like, slow down. We don't need to go to court. Court is really expensive. It takes a really long time, and nobody wins. Because even if you win, you spend thousands and hundreds, maybe millions of dollars to win that case. So my perspective is, let's stay out of court, make good contracts, make good deals, and hopefully avoid real adversarial. And really, it's negotiating hopefully for the benefit of both parties.
Right. Right. And that, I mean, it's a nice segue into what I imagine happens a lot, which is that in early stages of artistry and relationship, it's very easy to say, like, we don't need lawyers, we don't need contracts, like, we'll just figure this out. And then work inherently becomes valuable, either because like the band does better, blah blah blah. Now you're negotiating retrospectively. Everyone wants what is now got value to it, and things become more adversarial. So like my question to you would be, on average, where in the process do you tend to get approached by artists, producers, whomever it is, and where, if you could wave a magic wand and inspire the world, like where and when would artists come and talk to you for the first time?
Usually yesterday, right? I
Yeah.
mean, usually because normally I won't say it's normally too late, because I do have artists who reach out and are like, "Hey, we got offered this record deal, so great, let's dive into it." Not we signed this record deal, now tell us what it says, because then it's like, well, yeah, no, I can tell you how screwed you are, but I think that it is hard because of the nature of the way that the music industry works. I used to, at my old firm, I worked for a partner who had this. We were doing a lot of band separations, right? The bands were breaking up. They didn't have anything in paper, in writing, and it was very hard to pull things apart. And we were always talking about, wow, we wish every band had a band agreement that said, this is how this is who owns what, this is who gets what, which I still wish that every band had a band agreement. But my partner said, oh, I've got a great idea. We're going to do a band formation special. We're going to do, an operating agreement, an LLC formation, a band agreement, all for just $1,000. I said to him, I said, that is fantastic. But if any band starting out had $1,000, they're not spending it on a lawyer, right? If anything, they're putting gas in the van if they're even touring yet, right? So it's hard to say, okay, we're going to go spend money on a lawyer when we're not even making money as a band, right?
Yes.
And I think that what underlies this, though, is the importance of the documents, the importance of the contracts, even if it seems like everybody gets along and knows the deal. Contracts don't have to be super formal documents. It can be, non-lawyers can write contracts. I would not encourage non-lawyers to write contracts using legalese, right? The language of contracts, speaking that language is what we learn in law school, right? I'm not going to go write a contract in French because I don't speak French. Non-lawyers shouldn't go write contracts using legalese because they don't speak legalese. But 4 members of a band could put on a piece of paper saying, we own each song in equal parts. But Joe bought the van, so Joe owns the van, and John came up with the name, but we all are going to own the name together. Like the basic things that we fight about when bands break up, let's
Yes.
put it in a very simple document. Everybody signs it. At least we have something to get started. And ideally, we can bring in the attorney as soon as possible to put it in legal language that's actually going to be more enforceable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do think it's important to get in going as soon as possible, certainly before you're signing contracts with other parties like record deals, publishing deals, management agreements. That is absolutely the time to bring in an attorney. And the last thing I'll say about it is that a lot of people say, oh, we're hiring this producer, but he's a friend of mine. I don't want to stick a contract in his face because, we're buds and blah, blah. And I totally understand that. But it's not a bad thing. So, in the same way we say that good fences make good neighbors, good
Yep.
contracts make good deals. We
Yep.
put it in writing. It doesn't have to be adversarial. It's about making sure what we've already agreed to is just clearly written down so we have proof of it. Because if we have a handshake deal and we never put it in writing, our memories fade. And when that song hits and is making $1 million, we sometimes forget about who's supposed to get what percentage of the money.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I for what it's worth, personal anecdote, like I've felt those nervous feelings of like, man, do I really want to shove a contract with this person? Because particularly because like again, the general tenor of the conversation is like, hey, do you want to work on a song? Like, yes, I have all these ideas, but it's like it's all positive bubble, right? And the contract feels like a fucking anvil. You just drop in the middle of the conversation, like,
Oh
before
yeah.
we do any of that, like, here's a bunch of language that's difficult to read. However, I will say it has only been received by the people I've spoken to as a sign of professionalism. And ironically, I think something that a lot of artists struggle with is being taken seriously when they don't have infinite funds to have a fucking social media empire and a professional website and blah, 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 right? Like, if only. It would be lovely if we could all have those things. But yeah, and so I guess I would offer that to any artist who is having nervousness around using contracts. It can absolutely be a symbol of professionalism. And again, like, if it's your friend from second grade, maybe professionalism doesn't feel good and is bad.
Right.
But particularly given that so many relationships start via the internet, and like the extent to which you know this person is you've heard their music and they seem nice via email, like a symbol of professionalism is not all bad. It's not all
Right.
bad.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah.
Well, I am your client, so I'm probably just parroting something you've told me at some point and taking it as my own.
I thank you for doing so. I'm all just spread it far and wide.
Yes.
Everybody wins.
Spread the good gospel. Absolutely. Um, like, so do you deal with music exclusively? Or are you in sort of like entertainment, the umbrella?
So one thing that I learned, I went to law school because I wanted to work in music. And what I learned in law school is the same things that apply to music apply to most of the creative industries. Right? So the main thing being copyright, because copyright protects all sorts of creative work.
Sure.
But the contracts that we see or that we draft, the legal principles, there's a lot of crossover. And so it's very easy for us to do work in a lot of other media that is not just music, because we're applying the same concepts. So yeah, so Creative Law Network is in all sorts of creative industries with all sorts of creative people and businesses.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then, like, I'm trying to make this high level question a little more specific, but I'll kind of let you guide the answer. Like, I have curiosity around like what a typical week looks like. If there are sort of a common set of problems you find yourself navigating more often, is it seasonal? Are there times of year where like I imagine like summer, lots of shows means lots of shows and tour contracts and festivals and blah blah blah. I'm just like, what is the sort of the life cycle of a year at Creative Law Network?
It isn't that seasonal because of the different industries have their different
Got it.
seasons and pace and whatever. And so it actually, yeah, so that doesn't end up being very seasonal. I think that the common themes that we see are a lot of, um, I mean, in thinking about kind of my day to day, right, what you were asking about, a lot of it is it's talking with clients about what they're doing and how to protect them. Right? What contracts do we need? What steps should we take? Like I said, whether it's intellectual property registration protection, um, and really figuring out, what is important to protect them and further their business. So it can be, hey, I just got handed this contract, or it can be, hey, I'm hiring this person, I need this contract. Uh, it is. I mean, look, it is, and it is definitely all over the map. It's just, thankfully, I mean, this is one of the things I love about what I do is that it's different every day.
Mm.
So I'm very fortunate that way. For me, anyway. I think it's great.
Yeah, believe me, I would get bored if I had to do the same thing every day. So wearing many hats is sometimes overwhelming, particularly when it feels like you have to wear seven at the same time. But if
Sure.
I had the choice of that or a singular hat, and it was the only one I could put on or take off, like, I will take my seven juggling hats, and that will be just fine. That will
Right.
be
Right.
just fine.
Right. But it does,
Um,
by the way, go back to what we were talking about some artists wanting to be involved in their business and some not. Some
yes,
artists just want to
yeah,
make art. They don't want to deal with the
totally,
business. I
totally,
get it.
100%. Um, how do I want to ask this question? Again, I'm sort of putting on the hat of an artist who hasn't spoken to a lawyer yet. Are there places where you find artists are getting themselves into trouble or glossing over details? I think band formation is a great one of like, before there's anything really at stake, and not even in legalese, right? Like, pull up a Word document. Here's who we are. Here's what we're forming. Here's who owns it. Sign, sign, sign. awesome, no lawyer even required. But are there other areas where you think artists are not getting taken advantage of, but potentially putting themselves in compromising positions by not having more forethought about how to navigate something?
I mean, I think that really applies across the board. Like it's what you just said. It's just having the forethought to think about how you're going to navigate something. It's about
Mm,
anytime there is any sort of business arrangement, anytime money is exchanging hands, we should have a contract, basically.
yeah,
And so where and when that fits together and who's handling that contract may vary, but
sure.
it is still always going to be important in my experience. I mean, you also have to realize my experience is or rather my opinions are colored by my experience. And what I mean by that is people contact me when something goes wrong, right? I get to
Mm,
hear no client has ever called me like, "Hey, everything went great today." Right? It's like, so I'm going to think about how could this deal go wrong? And I'm not encouraging everybody to spend their lives thinking about what could go wrong. But when you say, oh, this gig is great because we're going to get paid this much and all we have to do is play this little and it's super cool and easy, fantastic. What happens if it rains? What happens if the power goes out? What happens if your bassist gets COVID? Whatever it is,
right.
that's why we have contracts.
Yes. Yes. That
So
makes a lot of
I
sense.
mean, yeah. And I think the thing that I will caution people against is there are a lot of like the internet is a beautiful, wonderful, horrible place, right? There's a lot of great things on the internet. There's a lot of trash on the internet. I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about contracts that people download off the internet because I see contracts that I'm like, this has nothing to do with your situation. You might have typed in, you know, producer agreement and come up with a producer agreement, but did you realize it was a film producer agreement, not a music
Right.
producer agreement? Like you just find like this is not the right document for this purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, better to have a contract that is than not to have a contract. We want to make sure we have the right contract.
Yes. Yeah. That makes sense. I will say anecdotally, I spent many nights overhearing phone calls, and the number of times I heard this contract wouldn't stand in court. Like, even if you have a signed contract, like if the language is bonkers or has nothing to do with the actual field of expertise, like it's very easy for it to get thrown out. Which again, like I don't say as a threat, all the more reason though to just be thoughtful about if you're going to sort of do something the right way, to do
Yeah.
it in a way where you can feel confident in the language that's written.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
So I remember I got to see you at the the Colorado Music Conference a couple of months ago, and I'm remembering that one of the biggest pieces of advice you gave is like, if the contract is due tomorrow, it's already too late. There is no lawyer on earth unless they're charging like $8,000 an hour who can give you 24-hour turnaround on a contract. So like, it's a frame of thinking, right? And so like, I'm getting ready to release an album at the end of September, and I'm already thinking about like what are the potential things that might come up, so I can get with you now and have those conversations and see what might be. And we may even have to have a hard conversation. I'm like, if I had infinite money, I would do this, but I don't. So given that I'm going to release an album, what are the things that are truly essential? I think that's part of it. Um, you also said don't sign anything without having a lawyer read it. Makes a lot of sense. Like, are there other like just sort of general gems or general ways of thinking you would encourage artists to step into as they navigate their career from the perspective of an attorney?
Oh, man.
An infinite number. We could be here for hours, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I think no, I mean, I think we've hit the top ones. I mean, I think that really, the attorney's going to tell you you should call an attorney, right? It's like that's what I'm. So I think that's kind of what it
Got
comes
it.
down to.
Yeah.
And but to be clear, like my artists, my clients don't. It's not that they have to call me every day. I mean, for example, if I have a client who's a music producer, right? Well, it's not really the best example because producers don't issue the contracts. I have a client an artist just getting started, right? So they don't have a booking agent yet. So we need to put together a performance agreement that they can give to the venues when they're going to go play a show, because we want to have that deal in writing. They're not calling me every time they have a show. I prepare a template agreement for them that they can use with different shows with different venues. Right now, that agreement we put together based on how they run their business, like how many people do we have, what requirements do we have, how do we want to handle cancellation, do we require a deposit, all of these things. But the point is, it's not like, oh, now I'm going to have to call my lawyer every day.
Yeah.
Right. It's more like, for the most part, I'm in the background. I'm there. I'm there when you need me, but I'm not I'm not there day to day, because you're out there running running your business or running your career, right? And you call
Yes.
me when you need me.
Yes. Yeah. I think to the way it's materialized in my head is like, normally I think about calling you when there's going to be a material change to the way I approach making art and sharing it with people. If I'm just continuing to make songs, I have a producer agreement, change the name, change the splits, but that agreement stands, right? Like, but if I'm thinking about an album and that's new, if I'm thinking about a different lens of distribution, if I'm thinking about touring, etc., that's normally when I would pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Dave, what am I not seeing? What do I not
Yeah.
know?" Slight like bend to that next question. I imagine you see plenty of agreements between artists and managers. I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of artists stand in the place of like, God, I can't wait to get a manager so I can take some of these things off my plate.
Of course.
From the perspective of both relationship and then like contract and agreement, what are some of the most successful sort of structures for manager artist relationship that either you've experienced or been a part of or seen?
I think the success is a lot about relationship. It's not about the financial terms. It's not about the length of the contract. It's about, do we get along? Do we share a vision?
Yeah.
Are we on the same page, essentially? And I think that's the most important thing. The
Yeah.
contract is really important because it well, really, contract ends up being most important when the relationship ends, is really when the management contract becomes most important.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of things, or there are a few things in management contracts that may come as a surprise to artists who haven't done a management agreement before. The most common one is the notion of a post-term commission. So the idea here is, you pay a manager a commission, right? You pay a percentage of your revenue.
Right.
And what a lot of management agreements say is, once we are done, once we are no longer working together, you're going to continue to pay me a commission on the work I did. So if I helped you release that album, I continue to commission that album even if we are done. And for a lot of artists, that is mind-blowing and horrible. And I
Yeah.
totally get that.
Yeah.
It is an industry standard that is hard to get away from. And there's a lot of ways to negotiate that part of the deal. So it's not just you're stuck with it.
Right.
But there's a few management agreements aren't overly complex documents. There's a few things we're going to talk about, like, how long does it last? What's the commission? What is that post-term commission? Things like permissions, like, can they sign contracts for you? So there's a few things I'm looking out for, but they're not 40-page agreements that take months and months to negotiate. They can be, but they don't have to
Sure.
be.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Have you ever seen a management agreement where the manager, rather than receiving a direct commission, takes a percentage of ownership of like an LLC or a company that the artist has created?
I've seen it, but I absolutely would never advise my client to sign it.
Say more. Say more
Well,
about that.
because the thing is, you are, because a management term ends. You may be with your manager for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but when you're done, you're done. And if they own a piece of your business, you're never done.
It's
You are partners
perpetuity.
with
Yeah.
them, right? And if you have to buy them out of that business, that can get really challenging. Now, there are always going to be unusual situations. There's always going to be outliers, but the standard, I've never seen one that I was like, oh, that's a better deal for you than the normal pay a commission.
Right.
Um, Ownership of, let's say, masters, it's doable because a master is going to pay royalties, and the thing is, to me, it's kind of like, why not just pay the manager a commission on that master instead of giving them an ownership percentage of that master? Like, there's
Sure.
not really much of a benefit to the artist to giving up ownership. And it's not like it's like the manager is going to go sign a record deal for their percentage of that master. So it's not really necessary. Um, Again, there's going to be situations where it might make sense, like the manager is somehow involved in the creation of the master, like helping create the album. Maybe the manager is also the producer or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
But it's not a normal thing that I'm used to seeing.
Totally makes sense, which now gives me another fun segue. So let's talk about labels and,
Oh
and the
boy.
fact that ownership of masters,
Yeah.
boy, does that seem to get contentious. So again,
Yeah.
like if we step back to an earlier question, there is the truth that we are likely to see the worst stories and to see more of them. Because again, there's plenty of artists who I'm sure are functioning just fine within the label system, but we see the ones who are disgruntled because they're fucking tweeting about it every day. So we get a front row seat to it. But I'm curious, like, let's assume both that like the current model isn't doing great and that the idea that labels will completely evaporate is unlikely. Sort of where would you like to see those relationships evolve? What is like the next evolution
the
of how they
model
may function?
it's changed a lot, right? So, I mean, the industry has changed a lot. The model has changed, or rather, there's a lot more models. Okay. So,
Yes,
because
very
now
true.
the model, the kind of primary model is still left over from decades ago, right? Well, everything was different about the music industry, so I don't really get started on that. But ownership of masters, the basis for that is if the label pays for the artist to make the master, the label wants to own the master. That's where it comes from. The label is going to, pays a producer, pays for studio time. Their argument is, okay, well, I should own this thing that I paid for. Now the artist gets a percentage of royalty on the money that comes from those masters, but that's the reasoning behind it.
Right.
The models have changed so much because there are so many other ways we distribute music now, and including the fact that it used to be the only way to get your music distributed was with a label.
Right.
When you only had music in stores and on radio stations,
Right.
that you weren't going to go to every record store in the country and say, "Here, take my album," right?
Right.
So that's what labels did.
Right.
Now anyone can go with TuneCore or DistroKid or CD Baby or whatever and get their music distributed without having to go through a label. So it makes me think about what is the value of labels today. And certainly paying for the recording of a master is great if they have the money to do that. But most label deals, I mean, major label deals will still go that way, but there's a million labels out there now, and most of them are not paying for the recording of masters.
Right.
And a lot of the value of a label is the marketing and promotions, right? It's not that you need a label to get the music on Spotify. It's that you need people to listen to it, right? So how do we get people to listen to it? We market it. And so that when a client comes to me and says, I really want a label deal, my first response is, why? Not because I don't want you to have one, but tell me why. If the answer is because I really want someone to promote my album, there you go.
Great.
If the answer is because I really need a budget to make the album, well, we have to find a label that's willing to pay for that. What I don't want to see is an artist giving a label ownership of the masters for nothing in return.
Yeah.
It's like, here's my masters. I'll just sit around and wait and see if you sell any.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the exchange I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. And I guess I don't know how much you see this, because I think on the one hand you could say that hopefully the labels are evolving and their aptitude around marketing and promotion is improving. There's also a perfectly reasonable question of like, are labels, many of which have a rich legacy and not really doing a lot of marketing and promoting, are they the best avenues for partnership for artists now? Or like, if someone could guarantee that you would go viral on TikTok, is that more valuable than a label? Like it might be, because I know there's no A&R, I know there's no studio time, I know there's no music connections, etc. But if going back to our previous conversation about a niche, if all you really need is 1,000 people who love the weird shit you do, and you can find them via social media, I don't know. Do you need anything beyond that?
Right.
Maybe, maybe not.
Well, and also one of the many things that's changed is that we are not making money selling recorded music. I mean, the age of CDs was a golden age where we made these little plastic discs for pennies and sold them for $20. Labels were making money hand over fist, right? So they could share some of that money with the artists, ideally. But now it is not about, I mean, there are artists who make a lot of money from their Spotify, from their DSPs, but most of us are out there playing a lot of shows, trying to do licensing, doing sponsorship and endorsement deals. Other revenue streams have taken over, where the revenue stream from recorded music has, I won't say gone away, but decreased as a piece of the overall pie.
For sure. For sure. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, that makes a ton of sense. I'm sure I could ask you questions for hours and hours, and yet I still think this would be very valuable for any artist that is curious about these things. But if you would like to, if you're interested, I know that something you offer, I think, and if I'm wrong, we'll edit it out, is a free consultation to just pick up the phone and just kind of get their bearings. So kind of like if you had a 30-second pitch or a 60-second pitch for Creative Law Network and what you do, you are welcome to share it.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's not about a pitch. You are correct. We always offer a free consultation because we don't expect anyone to pay us money without knowing who we are and what we do. And who we are is we are creative people who have worked in the industry before and are now on the other side helping creative people and businesses with the legal aspects of their work. And so we are all about providing great customer service and protecting our clients. And part of that is making sure that they have the opportunity to talk with us whenever they need us. So yeah, that is definitely part of it. And we absolutely love being able to work with people in the industry because we've all worked in the industry ourselves. So that is our driving force, and our guiding light is helping artists create, helping people be successful.
Awesome. And where should people find you? What is the easiest way to get in touch with you?
They can find us at creativelawNetwork.com. We are on all the socials. If you'd rather go that way, search Creative Law Network on your social media platform of choice. But creativelawNetwork.com, easiest place to find us, and send us an email, give us a phone call. Happy to chat and help out in any way we can.
Amazing. Dave, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I'm sure I will be giving you a call soon about distribution and album and plenty of other things that we can have a conversation about. But for now, this was great. Thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for listening to Stage Dive. I'm having so much fun having all these conversations and meeting these wonderful, wonderful people. But I appreciate that this is also going out to you, the person who is listening. So my request, my ask, my desire, if you have any curiosities, questions, guest recommendations, suggestions for the podcast, please send us an email at stagedivepodcast@gmail.com. We read every single email that comes through. We will get back to you. And we really do want to hear what you love about the podcast, things that you think could improve, and how we can make this a better show for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.